The general public are beginning to look around and ask themselves how we pull ourselves out of this economic mess we currently find ourselves in. Now, I think the truth is we're probably not going to be able to pull ourselves out. The reason for that is the economic models and the people who perpetuate them are, in my opinion, flawed. Now, the economic system we pretty much exclusively follow now in the West is the Keynesian model. So the Keynesian model was founded by Sir John Maynard Keynes. Keynesian economics served as the standard economic model in the developed nations during the latter part of the Great Depression. Now, interestingly enough, the Great Depression really was the first time we saw large-scale interventions from the central bank, aka the Federal Reserve in America, and large amounts of fiscal intervention from the US government in trying to, mitigate the recession/depression. And it turned out to be, one of the worst depressions in history, right? So Keynesian economics can be quite easily discredited from its very early days, but it came to fruition during the Great Depression through the things that the Fed and the US government did at the time. So Great Depression, World War II, and the post-war economic expansion, though it lost some influence following the oil shock and resulting stagflation in the 1970s. Now, stagflation shouldn't really be possible under the Keynesian model, the idea of a stagnant economy and moderate to high inflation at the same time. That really was something that Keynes said couldn't really happen. How can you have an economy that's stagnating? That should be deflation, but also have rising prices at the same time. So again, Keynesian economics was quite well discredited during the 1970s. However, the advent of the financial crisis of 2007-2008 caused a resurgence in Keynesian thought, which continues as new Keynesian economics. Now, we pretty much follow this model now completely in the West. The reason for that is governments like it because it kicks the can down the road, another few years. You'll hear no one at the moment, right? You heard almost no one in 2007, 2008 saying, let's just accept a big recession, let's clear the markets, let's keep interest rates relatively high, or, once interest rates have gone lower, let's put interest rates up to 3-4%. And no one would call for that because it's not politically popular to call for a recession or to do things that are going to make the recession worse, even if making a recession worse would clear the market, right? Same as we're in now. You're going to hear no one. You're not going to hear Boris Johnson. You're not going to hear Donald Trump. You're not going to hear anybody in Europe say, well, maybe we should put interest rates to 3% and just clear the market of all the malinvestment, of all the bad debt. No one's going to say that because it's political suicide, even though that would just mean a short, sharp recession and then things would start rebuilding. It's a lot more politically savvy to say, let's print money, let's keep interest rates near zero, and let's try and re-inflate bubbles. So one of the most prominent people who supports Keynesian economics is Professor Paul Krugman. Now, in 2002, this was just after the dot-com bubble had burst, Professor Paul Krugman said Greenspan needs to create a housing bubble. So just after the dot-com bubble collapsed, Paul Krugman said, now we need another bubble and it should be in housing, which was quite prophetic because there was, a housing bubble shortly after that. Now, Paul Krugman is often wrong just because he's a professor. I believe he's a professor of 2 universities. There's one in the US and I think the LSE as well. And he writes a lot of op-ed pieces for the New York Times. He's wrong about a lot of things. So Krugman, Trump will bring a global recession. He said this in 2016. It didn't happen. So he's often wrong. Just like the Keynesian model, he's often wrong. But this is the original New York Times op-ed piece that Paul Krugman wrote, W's Double Dip. W obviously referring to George W. Bush, President of the United States at the time. And scroll down to here. This is where he calls for the housing bubble. So to fight this recession, he's talking about the recession that is coming about because of the dot-com bubble and the malinvestment at the time through that. To fight this recession, the Fed needs more than a snapback. It needs soaring household spending to offset moribund business investment. And to do that, as Paul McCulley of PIMCO put it, Alan Greenspan needs to create a housing bubble to replace the NASDAQ bubble. So this is why it's dangerous. This is why I believe Keynesian economics is dangerous, because they're calling, when one bubble collapses, they call for another bubble to be created. Now, I don't believe this is what Sir John Maynard Keynes ever really intended. I'm not a fan of Keynesian economics, even the original form that Sir John Maynard Keynes put forward. But at least in Keynes's original concept, as far as I believe, the concept was that the government would run, budget surpluses during the boom years while the economy is expanding, and then when you face a recession, the government increases, fiscal spending, but it uses the money that is saved during the boom time and spends it, during the economic downturn. Now we don't do that. In most Western countries, we don't run budget surpluses for a long time. A big part of that is because the zero interest rate policy we currently live under, right? It's incredibly cheap for governments to borrow. That's the reason why we're in this big mess now, where we're probably going to see the defaulting of nations in Europe. You're looking at Italy, Greece, Ireland, Portugal, Spain, the UK as well. The UK's got serious problems as well. The fiat monies are in crisis. We're seeing that certainly with the Eurozone. We're eventually going to see that in the pound sterling, the US dollar, and pretty much all fiat currencies, right? Yen, maybe Swiss franc will survive, possibly. But the fiat money is all in trouble, and that's all because of these huge bubbles, these huge debts we have that are eventually just going to wipe the whole system out. Keynesian economics is dangerous because no one wants to say the truth. No one wants to say, well, after the NASDAQ bubble, there was a lot of malinvestment, there were a lot of errors made, there were a lot of companies which came into existence that probably shouldn't come into existence. We need a big recession, and it will clear the market. But rather than do that, people listen. When Paul Krugman says we need a housing bubble, people listen. He is a very influential, prestigious Nobel Prize winning economist, right? And just because a Nobel Prize winning economist, that doesn't really stand for anything. People that win Nobel Prizes, especially in the fields such as economics, they generally get that for political reasons. It's because they say and do things that like the establishment and the government want. They're kind of more mouthpieces and more puppets for central banks and the key players that want continual monetary expansion. But it's very dangerous, and this is one of the reasons why I don't believe the current mess we're in will be solved anytime soon, because we're already seeing it. We're already seeing I've heard almost nobody basically say, besides the few contrarian economists on platforms like YouTube, no one is calling for let's put interest rates to a sensible level, 3-4%. 3-4% is still very low historically for a UK interest rate. Historically in the UK, you're looking at 5-7% interest rates. If we had interest rates at 3%, that's still well below the historical norm. No one's calling for, let's not debase the currency anymore. How about unwinding QE? Yes, that would certainly mean in the short term, you're facing, a shorter, sharper recession. I mean, we're in a big recession now anyway, with everything else that's happening in the world in terms of the virus. But it's going to be the same old people saying the same old things, currency debasement, QE, money printing, whatever you want to call it, ultra low interest rates, large fiscal deficits and, fiscal spending from the government. It's the same old things. It's just exactly the same things that, Paul Krugman was calling for in 2002. I don't think these bubbles can be inflated much more than they are now, because each time you reinflate a bubble, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So the dot-com bubble, as bad as it was, it may have meant, a 6-month, a 9-month recession. It wasn't really that bad. Yeah, people in the US lost a lot of money in their 401ks, pension funds in the UK lose a lot of money, and that's not good. No one wants to see that. But it was isolated. It was pretty much like a stock market shock, right? We had 9/11 as well at the same time, and it's one of the reasons why George Bush didn't want a recession at the time, because obviously, Twin Tower attacks, etc. Then we had the housing bubble. That was an order of magnitude larger than the dot-com bubble. And now the bubble we're in now, which is essentially the bubble of everything, pretty much, we're seeing most Western nations, if not most, global nations, are facing, bankruptcy, insolvency. I don't think these debts, these gilts, these bonds, these US treasuries, I don't think they're going to be paid back. We're seeing a collapse of, paper monies, whether it's the euro, whether it's the pound, whether it's the US dollar, yen. You say, well, Swiss franc may survive, but besides that, I don't think there's much hope out there. Every time you reinflate a bubble, it gets like pretty much like an order of magnitude larger. So where we are now, I don't think this bubble is going to be reinflated. But then equally taking the pain of facing the recession, of unwinding all this bad debt going back to, 2000, 2002, and before then, don't forget, the central banks were no saints even before then. It's going to be a very painful readjustment, and that's, no sane politician really calls for, a recession to come. Boris Johnson's not going to get on a platform tomorrow and say, hey, look, guys, we're in a big mess. We've got this huge bubble. I'm going to jack interest rates to 3-4%, or ask the Bank of England to do that. And, it's going to be a big recession, but we're going to clear the market, and ultimately we'll be a lot more prosperous. We'll save the British pound. We'll rein in government spending. He's not going to do that, because that's political suicide. That's why governments like Keynesian economics, because it just says, hey, look, this isn't really a problem. We'll just print more money, we'll just spend more money, and we'll pull ourselves out of it. I don't think it's going to work this time, but that's just my thoughts and opinions. There's a lot of people out there, most of the prominent economists that work in universities, advise the government, the talking heads you'll see on TV, most of them will be Keynesian economics, so they'll just be calling for more money printing, QE, cheap money, ultra low interest rates, government spending to pull ourselves out of this. I really don't think it's going to be working this time. If you can argue that it ever worked before, you just kick the can down the road. It's quite scary times anyway. It's going to get an awful lot worse before it gets better anytime soon. That's my thoughts and opinions. Love to know your thoughts on this one, guys. Where do you think this recession is going next? Are we going to be able to reinflate this bubble, or is it? Well, what do you even say? It's just not good times. Jason from Liberty Bunker sign off. Thanks for watching this video, guys. If you like it, like, comment, share, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.